Hello and welcome everyone to the Q&A sessions this morning. I'm Meeta Sani and I'm really pleased to be joined today by Joellen Grizib. Hi, Joellen.
Oh, hi. I've enjoyed these sessions so much, so I always appreciate your inviting me to join you.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. We've had Tosh on a sabbatical and, well, not sabbatical from work, just a sabbatical from our webinar series. And I know he tunes in actually and keeps us on in the background. Hi, Tosh, if you're out there, hopefully seeing you back in the hot seat next week. It's really exciting actually just to see so many regulars come to these webinars, because hopefully it means that when we speak, it hits a nerve of something that aligns experience and also aligns solutions for people to take away. That's what these sessions are about. So welcome also to our new attendees. I noticed that we've got some new faces and that's fantastic. Welcome everyone. Joellen, before I jump into the topic for today, I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping. Okay. We run these sessions for around 40 minutes. They're every Thursday at 11 a.m. We understand time is precious, and we also try and keep our topics as current as possible so that what we speak about is something that can answer questions that you have or challenges that you're facing now. And one of the reasons that Joellen has been our guest for the last few weeks and so aligned is, one, Joellen, you've been on this journey with us from the start, haven't you?
I have. I've been in the audience getting so much advice and help and support. So when you ask me, I have things that I can offer back to everyone.
And it's been great, and the feedback's been fantastic. And the more you and I have been digging under the skin of what hybrid working means, it's a bit like the Pandora's box, isn't it? Yeah. We've opened the lid and there are so many things to consider, which is why today we're talking about how we ensure fairness, equality and inclusivity in a hybrid workplace. Because, we know that EDIB, as people are calling it, B being for belonging, equality, diversity, inclusivity and belonging. It's more than a buzzword. I think this last year it's become something that we're not just putting a piece of paper on, we're actually saying, how are we going to incorporate this?
Yes.
So I've got a poll today and we're asking everyone to just give us their feedback on whether you have an EDIB policy in your organization. And if you do, is it just a piece of paper that you give out in the induction and then probably forget about? Is it something that you embrace, so you talk about it and then you make sure it feeds through every layer of what you do in the organization? Or is it something you don't have yet? So at the moment, these results are 16%. So half of you say you have one, half of you say you don't. The half that say you have it, 2/3 say you incorporate it, and 1/3 of you say you don't. So that's really interesting, isn't it, Joellen?
Yeah. And I think that it is, in a way, we shouldn't say that it took us by surprise, but I do think that its importance has been highlighted so much, but people have not been haven't had their awareness raised in the way that perhaps they need to, or at least the organization, the top layer. I think that the underneath layer is probably more aware of what's needed and how to make it happen.
Yeah.
But I think that there is still kind of cemented in a very patriarchal way of looking at how we hire people.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to see that we've just had a few more votes, and the yes, and we incorporate in everything has gone up a little bit, which is great. But I think we can see here that we have work to do, because I think actually not having a policy at all means that you've got room for affecting change and impacting better outcomes for your people. And just taking your people on that journey is a really positive exercise. For those of you who have it but don't engage with it, well, guess what? From our session today, we can help you think about how you utilize that as a tool for inclusivity. We talk about inclusivity, the whole spectrum of EDIB, as I call it, is one thing is having a seat at the table, but it's another thing having a voice. And the inclusivity and the belonging is, let's make sure our people have a voice. And that's challenged even more in a hybrid world, isn't it?
Totally. Because, one of the things we touched on last week was about out of sight, out of mind, which happens. But it almost as though what I've noticed, and I think I'm not the only one who's noticed this, I'm sure we all have, is how much COVID is an excuse. It's a bit of an excuse not to answer the phone or give the poor customer service or not being able to see your GP and all the different things that and I know that I'm not saying it's always an excuse, but it's a little bit like, oh, I don't have to think about this now. We have to just get through. And actually, we are adapting now, and we do have to put real conscious thought into how we deal with certainly the 3 issues that you highlighted for today.
Yeah. So as always, we have a chat box. I'm going to type a quick hello into here just to show everyone it's really simple to say hi, to give us your thoughts, to ask any questions or comments. Our audience are always so engaging and we've got so much to say. And we learn from that as well as everyone who's attended. So please give us your thoughts, give us your questions. And that way the next 30 minutes or so can be really powerful and useful to everyone. So the 3 areas we're discussing today, Joellen, is fairness. So first of all, will you be able to offer hybrid to everyone in your organization? And how will you make sure that's fair? The second area is equality. So how do we ensure we're treating everyone equally despite different working circumstances and also different personal circumstances, I think is what we need to bring into this. Because let's not forget, I'm just going to confirm again, the 9 types of diversity: race, ethnicity, age, national origin, sexual orientation, cultural identity, assigned sex, gender identity, physical ability, and mental ability, also known as neurodiversity. So gosh, I mean, when some people think of diversity, obviously sex comes into it, sort of assigned sex, and then race. Those generally tend to be the 2, and then sometimes religion. But actually, when we lift the lid on this, there's a lot that we have to consider when thinking about equality.
Yeah, there's even more. I think you and I were talking about this before the session began, which is around diversity of opinion. We live in a much more polarized society in the last few years than we did before. I mean, or the polarization perhaps was kept under wraps. So how do you manage polarized ideas at work, or polarized values and polarized thinking in a way that doesn't make somebody wrong?
Yeah. And actually, in a hybrid world, we're not just polarized in our opinions, we're polarized in our geographical location. And that, again, will impact so much of the dynamic that we've just taken for granted. And it's interesting what you said, Joellen, about, coming into this period, we looked at it as we just got to get through it. And actually what's transpired over 2021, and especially in the last 4 or 5 months, as we've been talking about coming out, is that sadly, we're never going to be able to just draw a line and say that time is over. Yeah. We're going through the shades of grey of minimizing the impact of the pandemic, but understanding that hybrid is here to stay. In a way, to be successful and to engage positively, we've got to look for the benefits and how we can utilize hybrid working to enhance success and happiness in equal measures. And whatever the metrics are for your organization on measuring that, it's about bringing EDIB into that to ensure even better results, because we know that an equal and diverse workforce is better for the bottom line. It's better for attracting great people. The more diverse your people, the more diverse people you'll attract. So it's kind of just getting on the path and knowing that every day that will improve your world. We were talking about this beforehand about maybe having a little umbrella before we sort of go into each of the areas. And the umbrella for me is around culture change. Yes,
and culture change is not about changing your values and your ethos. It is about changing how you behave, how you present yourself, and your tolerance level, and I think that culture change, I mean, I look at my own organization. At the beginning of the pandemic, we were a face-to-face training organization. Absolutely. If you asked us, are you going to ever do anything remote? No. We're face-to-face. It's all dynamic. And we had to have a culture shift really quickly. And it was our resilience that made that happen. But I was looking at what was it that helped make the culture shift, the culture change. And it was an ability to let go of a picture of how it should look like. an ability to let go of the certainties that you relied on before. It's an avoiding of replicating what it used to look like and trying to make it happen like that.
Yeah.
It required everyone's involvement, and I mean everyone.
Yeah.
It required a willingness to try and fail. And we did. At the beginning, we tried a ton of stuff, some of which worked, some of which didn't. It required creativity, obviously.
Yeah.
It was a period of upheaval. Expect a period of upheaval, of confusion. And my favorite word is tolerance. We had to tolerate what we were going through, but also allow people to be where they were at, to be tolerant of where some people were weeping, you know, and saying, I will never be able to do training again. I don't know how to do the technology.
Yeah.
All of that went in. It, as I say, it doesn't mean giving up values. And what we did is what we do as an organization anyway, is what do we want it to look like and work backwards from there.
Yeah.
And the intersection of where we were and where we wanted it to be, by working backwards, we were then able to take the steps. And also empathy.
Yeah.
Empathy. It goes hand in hand with tolerance, empathy for where we're all at. And that's right now. We still sometimes shortchange ourselves on the empathy.
You know, and that's, you know, again, as we were just sort of warming up for our session today, we both spoke about our angle on today's topic. And I said to you, the word that keeps arising for me is the emotion behind business, the emotion behind when someone feels like they belong. And what EDI does for an organization is to create that feeling of belonging. And we know that when you get that hug, it creates oxytocin, and the oxytocin creates the connectivity with that people. And we need to create that business version or an organizational version of the hug. And so I think that's what the culture is. You know, I think, you know, we at the main group, and I was reflecting with you quite honestly, and I think one of the beauties of our webinars is the authenticity and honesty that everyone comes at it with. So I'm going to be open in that space as well, which is that the main group historically, especially since I bought the business, I've been here over 20 years, bought the business out 10 years ago. And the first thing I did was go out to my people and work together on an exercise of culture and creating a cultural framework and having what we call the four cornerstones of culture, greatness, integrity, clarity, and energy. And really looking at our success in how we demonstrate those values, how our stakeholders and everyone demonstrate those values, as well as how those values help us be successful in our roles. But I admit that through this pandemic and through working in a hybrid world, we haven't really, and we've got new people, you know, we've got our core spine of the organization who've been with us 5 to 15 years. But our new people, we've brought in and we've measured them in the hiring process on our culture. But how much are we actually checking back in to make sure that our cornerstones of culture align with the future of the main group, what we stand for as people? And I love what you said about empathy, because I think empathy shows that we treat people holistically, not just as a source of income, you know, work rate or anything like that. It means we look at people as a whole and understand that, you know, we spoke about our journeys, and there's actually a journey within the journey of the pandemic, because some people have lost loved ones, some people are having personal anxiety. So it really is, I think, about stepping back as an organization and saying we want to do something about ensuring that as we become a hybrid working world, our EDI policy will look at the following, not just what we stand for, but the process that we're going to go through to get it right, and then check back in on ourselves as well.
I think that it's very interesting. I'd like to could we segue into the fairness?
Yes.
It's fairness of all the three things that we have on our piece of paper here. It's very subjective fairness. You know, we'll have had this if anyone has siblings or cousins. It's like, it's not fair. They got this and I didn't. Yeah. The parents may think that everything is fair.
Yeah.
You know, we have twins in our lives. They're not our twins.
Yeah. I have
12. You have twins. And these twins are continually looking at each other to see who's got what. And it's not fair as a common conversation. A little less now that they're 12. But if you looked at it from the outside, it would be, it seems to be fairly distributed. So fairness to me is very, very subjective.
Yeah, it's personal perspective, isn't it, on the fairness?
Yeah. So it is interesting about, again, I guess we have to revert to communication at some point, is what would make something unfair?
Well, the one thing is having the rules of engagement, if you like, in like the equivalent in a business of parents is the leadership. Yeah. Right. And so the leadership all being very black and white and giving clarity on what fair isn't just a word, but what it looks like in behavior. I think that is because people interpret words in a different way. So if we say, as a team, we are always going to work collaboratively. Well, what does collaborative mean? How would, Peter, Paul, or Penny demonstrate fairness in a different way? So I think it's exactly that. How would we get that agreement on what fairness is?
Well, it's also, we've seen that some organizations are saying people who work from home should be paid less because they don't, and it's like,
yeah. Did Google just agree that, or is it Amazon? Someone just agreed.
I think it was Google who said that they were going to cut the salaries of people who work from home. And yet it's like, where do you draw a line? Because that to me is extremely unfair. Do you get paid less because you may buy a more expensive lunch than me?
That's it.
I mean, it's like, I don't know. It
really...
If
we're measuring people on value.
Yeah.
And working from home doesn't affect the value that they are adding to the organization, then cutting their salary is going to hurt, isn't it?
It's going to hurt. And it also, I think it puts the attention on the wrong place. So I think you've just hit the nail on the head, which is that fairness is around people's contribution. Some organizations or some people within organization, there isn't the luxury of choice. So, for instance, in my organization, we are now running either face-to-face or hybrid courses back at Impact Factory. Yeah. That means that one member of staff has to be there to do the meeting and greeting. Yeah. Now, we're very fortunate in that one lovely member of staff couldn't wait to come back to the office, doesn't want to work from home, and she is the meter and greeter.
Yeah.
But so there are some workplaces where there isn't a choice. You do have to be back. And that isn't even a question of fairness, but I think it is the determining what fair looks like in a hybrid situation for your organization. It will be different from mine.
Absolutely. And I think for leaders, managers, people leaders, it's about having the split of those who are in and out really clearly defined. And, it's got to be from the top down and it's got to be from the bottom up. There's got to be, what you said about from the outside in, it looks fair, but what's happening on the ground is a very different experience. It's getting communication flowing and keep what works, let go of what doesn't, and not beat ourselves up about what didn't work, but actually commend ourselves on trying lots of things and keeping what works, because that's the only way we're going to evolve. And when they look at the highest growing companies, they're very good at this. They're very good at not putting energy behind what didn't work. They look to put that energy back into trying different things. And it's interesting what you said about, that fairness, not just, as I said, it being dictated, but also incorporated. And I love the job description, but I know we've got some comments. So let's talk about the job description. Let's talk about some of these comments and then we'll come back to the JD. Right. So Chris, hi, Chris. Good to see you here. Chris says, consistency is also key to this debate. So often we see people who use different interpretations for different people or at different times. Yeah, again, that's the subjectivity, isn't it, of management and of perception.
It is. It's just an interesting thing about consistency, because sometimes people you do have to be inconsistent. Something, well, in my mind, I think because we're a very honest, transparent company, we will highlight perhaps some of the choices that we make. I mean, so much of what we do is collaborative so that everyone's in on it. And I guess I have to say it isn't always consistent. I'll be honest with you.
Again, because people receive and perceive things differently. And I think that's where culture comes in.
I think the consistency is us.
Yes.
The consistency isn't in the process, it's in who we are. And maybe that's what you mean, Chris, that for us it isn't necessarily the process that we do, but that, you know, the leadership team is always consistent in how it approaches things.
And that requires communication at leadership value. And, you know, Joellen, you know, my daughter's been going through some tests and things, and we've had to wait for appointments because they need to have what's called an MDT meeting, multidisciplinary team meeting. And actually what that is bringing together different minds, different perspectives, so that everyone can make the best decision going forward. And Chris, I think that approach to a business and an organization is key to keep that consistency. And in that room, everyone can agree, disagree, and say, yeah, that's where I'm coming from. This is how we should do it. But when you go out and you show your team how you approach and interpret things, you stand shoulder to shoulder, because that then means that there aren't chinks and there aren't confusing messages. But that, I think, takes a lot of communication.
Yes, it does.
You know?
Thank you, Chris. Yes, being genuine. I think that's sort of what I think why people still stay with the organization.
Yeah.
Because they know that even if some of the decisions they may not agree with, they've been party to.
Yes.
We have a comment from Kate, a question.
Kate asks, what do you think about companies which pay a London waiting, but has now had staff move out of London and who work from home? Should they still be paid a London salary? I mean, God, this one is such an emotive and powerful question. Bring that one up, Kate. No, but this absolutely goes right to the core of the issue, doesn't it? It's, what is the value of an individual? Is it that they travel in or out, or is it that they have a certain level of return on the hours that they put into the organization? I think we're going to have to change terminology.
This is what I mean by culture change.
Yeah.
We've consistently had these things around London waiting, or this, you know, special perks or bonuses, or however we've done it. If you look at changing the language and the behavior, as you know, language, you say, so often language and behavior go hand in hand. We may be looking at a very different paradigm rather than this is a yes or no answer.
And I think that it's really important for organizations to move forward with fact. So if you can say to your people that we want people to be in the organization because these results have shown better outcomes, and ultimately you represent an organization with objectives. If those objectives require your people to be in, then that's what you've got to stand for and explain the why.
Yeah.
If your objectives allow people to be in and out, then again you revisit what value those people add rather than their location. And I think we change. I mean, London waiting is not even used that much anymore.
Yeah, so that's the interesting thing. We've never done it.
But now it's coming up again because of the hybrid approach to working. And I mean, if you ask my opinion, I think we should keep people's salaries the same. I don't think we should remove, because I think people will still come in for some meetings. I think people will have to come into London for team events. They'll probably, I don't think anyone is going to be 24/7 remote. And also, I think there's an argument that much as we can go more national or maybe even international in the people we hire, ultimately there has to be some geographical connection so that you understand the environment you're working in and your customer base, depending on who your customer base are. If they're not going to be local, how are you going to replicate understanding your customers?
Yes, Chris has a really good point, and I think that this is exactly what you and I are talking about. Employees need to keep in mind that so many of their staff now work longer hours, and this extra time has a value, because it's true. If you're not commuting, I would suspect maybe not everybody, they might be at their desk at 8. Rather, I am usually at my desk at 8 because I don't have a commute anymore into London, which meant I used to get up at 5:36 to catch a train, drive to the train station, catch a train. And yes, I might be doing thinking time, but now my thinking time usually is overnight. I have to do the commute is about 10 steps from my bed.
Yeah, exactly. And people are giving more in different ways. You're so right, Chris. Employers do need to keep that in mind. And I think that's why, and Kate says that you are one of those people. So Out of interest, Kate, has your organization changed their policy, or are they keeping it the same? It'd be interesting to know what your organization's approach has been. We're seeing both. And again, like any organization, who you are, what you stand for, and your why, whether that's your culture, it's a statement, it's a mantra, it could be company level, it could be team level, who we are, what we stand for, and our why. If things can relate back to that, this is what we do and this is why we do it, then as you said, Joellen, it's not just what we do, people get it, you know, and then they come to terms with it.
I would never, I mean, during the pandemic, we had a number of people move out of London, and it would never occur to me. I mean, I've only heard about it because of the Google thing, and now Kate's bringing it up. I never heard of people, you know, even thinking of cutting someone's salary or fees because they're no longer in London or near the office. So I'm naive in this. It's like, but I think it comes back to value.
Yeah, it does. And Kate, thanks for replying. Kate said it's all under discussion at the moment, which I think is probably true for the majority of organizations, but some of our senior leadership team also just moved. So I'm hoping things won't change.
Yeah.
You know, this brings us to equality, doesn't it? Right through to the second part of our session today, which is how do we treat everyone equally despite different working circumstances? And, you know, for me, it all goes back to why that person does the role, and the all important job description. I believe the most underutilized tool. It's a bit like a job description is, you know, you hire on that, you interview on that, you induct on that, and then it goes into a drawer, never to be seen again until that once a year appraisal process, or however your process is in your organization. But right now, with hybrid working, values, competencies, they've all shifted, you know? So it is something to think about. We've got a comment. We've got a question here from Jenny. Is it possible to pay less to new hires and acknowledge the current pay rates as legacy? Well, this is definitely one for the employment law spectrum. And I think that might be a really good one that we look into more next week and get Tosh's insight into.
But it is interesting because if you have a new hire, I suppose the way we have done things is we start with the figure that we start with what we think is the figure that we want to offer somebody at some point. The probation period, we pay less.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we say, yes, you've achieved what we think you need to achieve, however long it takes. Sometimes it's an extended period. And sometimes it might just be the normal 3 months. But as I know you've talked about this in another webinar, that, you know, we have to chuck that out too, the idea of what a probation period looks like.
Yeah.
I think then it isn't about offering someone a lower salary. It's saying, this is what you could achieve. This is what our expectations are. So over the next few months, this is what could happen.
Yeah, I agree. And what I would add to that, Jenny, is that new hires, when they come into a role, and if in your organization you have different roles and different salary bandings, you'll have a lower limit and a higher limit on that role. And regardless of where people are working at home or in the office, when you're bringing people in and they are going through their onboarding and getting to know the organization, when most of the value shift is from the organization to the individual, because they're upskilling them, they're training them, they're inducting them, absolutely you can say, right, for now, because we're imparting, yes, you're bringing something to the table, but a lot of the value is going towards the individual. You can keep their pay less, but then you have a checkpoint, whether that's 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, where you say, as that shift means that the value starts to add in, you know, much greater quantities, you can then shift that up. And I think it's a great tool to say, you know, we call it a roadmap. So at point zero, this is you, this is what we give you at 3 months, this is where you will be, this is where the organization will be. And this is what a salary review looks like. You know, in order to benefit from a salary review, these are the competencies, skills, and outputs you will need to demonstrate. You know, and so actually, when we talk about the job description, I think that's a great foundation. But from that, for equality, I think everyone who's managed should have a roadmap, a really basic roadmap. It doesn't need to be an all singing, all dancing. It can be 3 objectives for that individual. And then you agree, do we look at that weekly, monthly, quarterly? And then people know what good looks like, and they all start to feel that they're being treated fairly and equally.
Yes, we used to do, I mean, our staff is much smaller now, but we did used to kind of review job descriptions and realize how quickly they can go out of date.
Yeah.
Because you find somebody's skill and you think, well, maybe they shouldn't be doing this. They should be doing that. Let's shift them over to that area, or give them more responsibility in that area, less in this.
Yeah.
So, you know, they can go stale pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
They're a dynamic tool. They are the thing, you know, the thing that makes the job attractive to somebody will be what's in the job description, but we often include that, you know, it will change. It's going to change.
Well, I think every job description has an element of ad hoc projects or whatever you want to call it. That's the role, because an organization evolves. Nothing stands still. The only constant change is change. I think that's not the right phrase, but we know what I'm saying. The only constant is change. That's it. The other thing I wanted to mention in this space, Joellen, and again, this comes back to, you know, the types of diversity that are out there, is that employers must not only make it the one-way street of what their expectation is, but also what support they'll give their people. So financial support, of course, the remuneration package is one, bonuses, what people are motivated by, and then technological support. So is it that some people will need more training on tech? You mentioned some of your people didn't feel as confident as others, and access to managers, access to support and someone to ask questions to. I know that with us being remote, the role of our ops director, Kate, has gone from sort of outward engagement to internal communication, making sure everyone's on the same page and helping everyone achieve clarity in communication, so we all feel on the same page. And so don't underestimate that, you know, we as employers need to give all the right tools to our people. One of the things we brought in, a really simple thing, a little app that means that people can, rather than their phone ringing to their personal number, they've got a little app that they dial through and they get phone calls on, which means at the weekends and holidays, you can actually put that app on DND, whereas you probably might not do that for your phone. You know, so little things like that to think about how you can create accessibility, but also healthy boundaries. Because the challenge of equality is that presenteeism is actually, I think it's already starting to show its face in another way. It's not about being at the office at your desk. It's about always replying to a Teams chat or an email or a WhatsApp. So I think presenteeism has shifted in style, but I think it's, unfortunately, there was a period of time when everyone was just relieved that we could work remotely.
Yes.
But then towards the end of it started to return. What do you think on that?
Well, it's a very interesting thing for me because, and we've talked about this privately, but I can't imagine that those of you out there aren't feeling something similar to what Mita and I are feeling. This term that was talked about in the New York Times, it seems to have spread, about languishing, about not having a lot of energy, about still kind of paddling a bit rather than that, oh, I have all this energy to move forward. And I think that affects, when I come back to the word empathy, it's like having that empathy that it's still a struggle for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so when we look at what equality means and what diversity and inclusivity means, it is around allowing or acknowledging the fact that we, in general, aren't back to the same levels of energy that we used to have, or certainly that I used to have.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was full of energy, and I'm full of energy right now because I'm engaged in this.
Yeah.
When I have to kind of self-create, I kind of go, like the witch, melting.
Recognizing ourselves, because when we come from this dynamic approach, and I think I'm struggling more now than I have in the last 18 months. So again, don't assume that if your people were okay, that they're always going to be okay, but continually check in. And Chris has a comment which reflects this. This comes back to what we talked about some weeks back. What on an individual basis will enable each person to be effective in their roles. And you're absolutely right, Chris, looking at everyone individually, looking at their value add from that role individually, and then checking in that as a person with their perspective and their mental well-being, have they still got all the right tools?
Yes. What I'm finding is that not for my trainers, I'm giving a lot more support than I did pre-pandemic. A lot more. Can we jump on and have 15-minute chat about this client or this situation or how I'm feeling? And that's something that I'm born for. I love giving that level of support. It's what I do have energy for.
Yeah.
But I think it comes back to a lot of support for people and acknowledging that you will have to give more support to some people will require that.
Yeah. And it's always checking back in. So having mental health first aiders or engaging with a company that gives somebody a mental health helpline. Something we're looking at offering is an equality and diversity helpline, where if people are feeling that they're not getting the right support, that they can talk to us about how we can help their organization give more solutions to challenges that arise. Because it becomes so subjective and situations arise all the time. Look at right now with everything going on in Afghanistan. Some people, we talk about polarization. Some people literally are in mourning about what's going on out there. Some are because of the humanitarian crisis. Others are because they've lost loved ones. And then there are other people that are oblivious, maybe not oblivious, but not as affected. So all of a sudden we've got a new dynamic that is affecting people's mental health, their energy, their positivity. And I know being at home means that we don't always have as much access to an environment that can shift us out of that. And I just wanted to, because time as always is flying so quickly, I wanted to bring up some solutions for inclusivity, which is making sure all voices are heard and listened to whilst in a hybrid organization, Joellen. And these are quite interesting. There's one in particular here that, the article I was looking at was experts recommending hacks that you can use for both remote and in-office workers to promote inclusivity. One of them says, set a basic rule that all meetings should be held on video conference, whether employees are in the office or not, because you're less likely to overlook remote workers, such as leaving them off meeting invitations, if you have a clear policy in place. Like, what do you think on that?
Well, we do. I mean, all meetings are hybrid.
This is actually saying put everyone on video, even if you're in the office. Because of the equality of engagement that comes from that.
How would you do that physically? Has anyone tried to have more than one person at a meeting? I mean, we have a meeting, as you know. When you look at what the feedback is, the technical, the whoop, 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 whoop. If we have two people sitting at two different desks.
Oh, yeah, the feedback is awful.
The feedback is awful. So they gather around one computer.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure physically how that would be possible. Interesting.
It is interesting. And I personally don't agree with it. I think that as much engagement that people can have in terms of human touch and conversation, the better. Now, if you're a completely remote working world, then of course you're going to have everyone on video conferencing. What you could do is almost have I'm holding the pen. So whoever holds the pen speaks, and maybe what you do in your team meeting is have people in and people on video, but pass the pen around so everyone gets a chance to be heard, rather than, because I don't think, at the beginning, as I said, I was so relieved that video worked. And look at us, we're doing this now. And we've been able to share so much more knowledge and expertise to and from our network because of video. But there's such an important part that is human contact. So I personally wouldn't work towards that, but I would definitely work towards having clear communication policies, clear lines of expectation of how we communicate. For example, the WhatsApp versus the Teams chat versus email. Everyone's going to have a different approach to how they want to be contacted. And Yvonne, you've come up with a comment here: staff member anti-vax and doesn't want to attend office but needs to weekly. Right. Well, Joellen, I know you've got some thoughts on this, haven't you? This is
what we do. We decided to have a policy because our delegates, when we started to return to either fully face-to-face or hybrid, where we have some delegates in the room and some on a big screen, phoning in, zooming in.
Yeah.
we decided that because we were getting questions from our delegates, we needed a policy. And our policy was that if you are training, you have to be double vaxxed. So if you are the trainer, one of the trainers in the room, in our premises, if you are running a training for a client outside of Impact Factory premises, you have to have the conversation with them if you are not vaxxed. Yeah. So we do have 2 non-vaxxers, they want to call themselves. They don't want to call themselves anti-vaxxers.
Interesting.
So, and we've had some very good open discussions so that we aren't wrong and they aren't wrong. We just have a policy and we're really clear about the policy.
Yeah.
So you can have as much training outside of Impact Factory premises and not be vaxxed, but if you are coming in, you do. So once having a policy, that's the policy.
Yeah. And I think it's really important, again, to have the clarity of that and then the fairness in applying it. And every organization will have a different impact of non-vaxxers or anti-vaxxers. So make your approach right for you. And that's what's most important, is applying that for your organization consistently.
Yes, I think that was what we knew, that it also meant that the delegates also knew our policy.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Stakeholders as well.
So that everybody who comes in, and I know that they're not always that effective, but it's what we have, so that everyone, trainers, staff, and delegates, take a lateral flow test a half hour before a course begins.
Yeah.
Or the staff takes it much earlier. And then again, it's fair across the board. Yeah. You might not like it, but it's fair across the board.
That's it. And that's what we've got to work towards. And also acknowledging that that's everyone's responsibility. Chris has a comment, and we're going to do this as our tying up comment now because we're actually over the 40 minutes. Chris says the bigger issue we need to consider is the bit in the meetings just before they begin or after they end. Because if we're remote, we miss these unplanned elements.
Yeah, absolutely.
So true. And how do we deal with that, because these are off the cuff, unplanned things. And it's I think why it's important for organizations to have a policy that everyone has some in the office time. I think that's really important, whether it's one day, a week, a month, whatever it is, have the time when everyone is together. I know, obviously, taking into consideration the safety and, pandemic distancing rules of your organization withstanding, but definitely have that FaceTime as well. And hopefully that will help everyone on their EDIB journey to a successful hybrid working place. And as we tie up our session today, it's a 50-50 split on the question on our poll today, which is, do you have a diversity, equality and inclusion policy? 50% of you have said no. If that's something you're interested in incorporating, please reach out to myself. We are helping our clients create and write these all the time. And for those of you who do have one, 80% of you who have one say you incorporate it in everything, so well done. 20% say you don't, so we can help you with that too. So you're going to get a recording of this session, both mine and Joellen's contact details, and we hope that today's session has been helpful in helping you create success in your hybrid working world. Joellen, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I think I'm going to be back in the audience again next week, aren't I?
You very well might be, but we're back here at 11 a.m. and hopefully we'll see you on this side of the camera as well soon, Joellen.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Everyone. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.